June 1944. Normandy. An American rifle company attacked across a Norman field. By noon, half were dead. They had advanced 40 yards. 40. 6 miles away, a British general was calling it success. It wasn't, because Bernard Montgomery had made a promise on D-Day. A promise now costing American soldiers thousands of lives. He had sworn Caen would fall on June 6th. It was still in German hands 6 weeks later. And because of that failure, American boys were dying in a landscape the Germans called perfect killing ground. The hedgerows, the Bocage, a maze where every field was a fortress, every hedge a machine gun nest, every 100 yards paid for in blood, over 40,000 American casualties. And then Montgomery did something that made Bradley and Patton furious. He claimed failure had been strategy, that the bloodbath in the Bocage was the plan all along. There was one problem. Captured German generals said he was lying, and one American general was about to prove him wrong. George Patton. What happened next didn't just save the Normandy invasion. It destroyed Montgomery's version of history. This is the story of the promise that broke and the breakout that saved D-Day. To understand what went wrong, you have to understand what was supposed to happen. Operation Overlord was 18 months in the planning, the largest amphibious invasion in history. British and Canadian forces would land on the eastern beaches. Gold, Juno, and Sword. Their primary objective, Caen, a critical road junction connecting Normandy to Paris, open, flat terrain beyond it, perfect for armored warfare, perfect for a breakout. If the Allies captured Caen quickly, they could push south and southeast, preventing the Germans from containing the invasion. Montgomery promised Eisenhower he would take Caen on D-Day. Not D+1, not within a week. On D-Day itself. June 6th, 1944. British forces would secure the city by nightfall. American forces on Utah and Omaha beaches would capture the Cotentin Peninsula and the port of Cherbourg. Critical for logistics, but secondary to Montgomery's push inland. The entire plan depended on speed. German Panzer divisions were in France. If the Allies got stuck on the beaches, the Panzers would counterattack and push them into the sea. Montgomery had to break inland fast. He assured everyone he understood the stakes. Caen would fall on D-Day. The breakout would begin immediately. June 6th, 1944. British and Canadian forces stormed ashore on the eastern beaches. The landings succeeded. Casualties were lighter than expected. Thousands of troops were moving inland toward Caen by mid-morning. The path to Caen was vulnerable. German forces were thin. The terrain was open. But Montgomery's plan had a fatal flaw. He had prioritized logistics over speed. British forces paused to consolidate the beachhead. They waited for artillery to be landed. They organized supply lines before advancing. They were being cautious when they needed to be aggressive. By afternoon, German reinforcements were arriving. The 21st Panzer Division counterattacked between the British and Canadian sectors. By nightfall on June 6th, British forces were still 3 miles from Caen. Montgomery's promise was already broken. He told Eisenhower the delay was temporary. British forces would resume the advance the next morning. Caen would fall within days. June 7th came and went. British forces attacked toward Caen and were stopped. June 8th, same result. June 9th, still stuck. The Germans were rushing panzer divisions to Normandy, and every one of them was being sent to stop the British at Caen. At German headquarters in France, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel was making a critical decision. He had limited panzer divisions to defend against the Allied invasion. He had to choose: concentrate armor against the British at Caen or against the Americans in the West. The British were clearly trying to take Caen. If they broke through, they could drive deep into France. Flat terrain, good tank country, a direct threat to Paris. The Americans in the western sector were fighting in the Bocage, ancient earthen banks 4 feet high, topped with centuries of thick vegetation and tangled roots. Stone walls, sunken lanes, every field a natural fortress. The Bocage was a nightmare for armored warfare. Rommel made his choice. He would concentrate his panzers against the British at Caen. The 21st Panzer Division was already there. He sent the 12th SS Panzer Division, then the Panzer Lehr Division, then the 1st SS Panzer Division, Germany's best units, their newest tanks. By mid-June, 7 German panzer divisions were concentrated around Caen. Over 500 tanks. These were the divisions that could have crushed Bradley's forces while they were still consolidating on the beaches. Instead, they were all fighting Montgomery at Caen, and the Americans were alone in the Bocage. The Bocage. No briefing could have prepared American soldiers for what they found in those Norman fields. Thousands of small fields separated by earthen banks 4 feet high, topped with thick vegetation and ancient trees whose roots had grown for centuries. These weren't garden hedges. They were fortifications. The roots were so thick they could stop a 30-ton tank. When a Sherman tried to climb over a hedgerow, its thin belly armor pointed at the sky. A perfect target for a German anti-tank round. The Germans turned every hedgerow into a defensive position. Machine guns covering the narrow lanes, mortars hidden in positions Americans couldn't see. Every approach mined. American infantry had to attack across open fields toward hedgerows they couldn't see through. German machine guns cut them down before they could close the distance. If they made it to the hedgerow, Germans on the other side threw grenades over the top. If Americans breached one hedgerow, there was another one 100 yards away, and another one after that. American tanks couldn't help. The Bocage neutralized American advantages in armor and air power. The casualty rate was horrifying. Companies lost 50% of their strength in days. Regiments were decimated, attacking objectives measured in hundreds of yards. By early July, American casualties exceeded 40,000. Nearly 1/3 of Bradley's assault divisions were casualties. The situation got so desperate that cooks, clerks, and mechanics were handed rifles and sent to the front lines to fill the gaps left by Montgomery's delay. Every one of those men has a name. Every one of them has a family that received a War Department telegram. before we get to what happened when Bradley finally had enough, and the American soldier who changed everything with a welding torch, take a second to subscribe to Secret War Journal. We tell the stories that official histories tried to bury. Hit subscribe now so you never miss one. July 18th, 1944. Montgomery launched Operation Goodwood. He told Eisenhower this would be the decisive breakthrough. Over 2,000 bombers dropped 7,000 tons of bombs on German positions east of Caen. 3 British armored divisions moved forward. Over 700 tanks. For a few hours, it looked like success. British tanks advanced through the bombed area. Montgomery sent optimistic reports to Eisenhower. The breakthrough is happening. The Germans are retreating. Then German forces that hadn't been hit by the bombing counterattacked. 88mm guns hidden in villages destroyed British tanks at long range. German panzers that had survived the bombing moved into defensive positions. British armor ran into a killing zone. By the end of July 18th, the British advance had stalled. Over the next 2 days, the British lost over 400 tanks. Operation Goodwood was over. Montgomery called it a success. He said British forces had captured the ruins of eastern Caen. He portrayed it as a victory. But Eisenhower knew the truth. 400 tanks, 5,000 casualties, a few miles of devastated ground. Montgomery had promised a breakthrough. He had delivered another costly stalemate. Churchill was so furious, he almost fired Montgomery. Only intervention from British military leadership prevented it. 6 weeks after D-Day, Caen had not fallen. The primary D-Day objective was still in German hands. And then Montgomery did something that American generals would never forgive. He changed the story. He told the press, and eventually the history books, that he had never intended to break through at Caen. His real objective had been to hold German armor in place. Every panzer fighting the British was a panzer that couldn't fight the Americans. The attacks on Caen weren't failures. They were a deliberate strategy to fix German attention while Americans prepared their breakout. This was a lie. Montgomery's planning documents from before D-Day proved it. His orders to subordinate commanders proved it. His promises to Eisenhower about taking Caen on D-Day proved it. He had intended to break through. He had failed repeatedly. Now he was claiming failure had been the plan. Bradley knew. Patton knew. But Eisenhower couldn't publicly contradict Montgomery without destroying the alliance. So he accepted Montgomery's narrative publicly, while privately planning to sideline him forever. The Americans would break out, and they would do it themselves. Bradley had been planning the breakout for weeks. He couldn't wait for Montgomery anymore. Operation Cobra. Concentrate First Army for a massive assault near St. Lo. Heavy bombers carpet bomb German positions. American forces punch through weakened defenses and exploit into open country. Bradley had one critical advantage. The Germans were still concentrating against Montgomery. 7 panzer divisions at Caen. The German infantry facing Americans were good soldiers, but they didn't have armor support. If Bradley could break their line, there was open country beyond. He also had one other advantage. While the generals were arguing, American soldiers had been solving problems. A sergeant named Curtis Cullen had been staring at the Bocage problem for weeks. He looked at the steel obstacles the Germans had placed on the beaches, sharp metal stakes driven into the sand to stop landing craft. He had an idea. He welded sections of that German steel onto the front of Sherman tanks. Like a giant steel fork, the tanks didn't climb the hedgerows anymore. They drove straight through them. They cut through centuries of roots and earth like a knife through butter. American soldiers called them rhino tanks. Nobody had ordered this. Nobody had planned it. One sergeant with a welding torch solved the problem that had been killing American boys for 6 weeks. That was the American Army in 1944. July 25th, 1944, Operation Cobra began. Over 1,500 heavy bombers attacked German positions near St. Lo. Nearly 4,000 tons of bombs on a strip of front 4 miles wide. German forward positions were devastated. Infantry and support weapons destroyed or scattered. Communications broke down. Some units ceased to exist as organized forces. American infantry attacked immediately after the bombing. The 7th Corps, under Major General J. Lawton Collins, pushed through the cratered ground. German resistance was sporadic. The line was broken. By evening of July 25th, American forces had penetrated German defenses. July 26th. The breakthrough widened. July 27th. More American divisions poured through the gap. July 28th. American forces broke into open country. Beyond the Bocage, beyond the hedgerows. Tank country. The kind of terrain where American armor and air power could dominate. The kind of breakthrough Montgomery had promised to achieve at Caen. 6 weeks earlier. August 1st, 1944. George S. Patton's Third Army became operational. His mission was to swing west into Brittany to capture ports. Patton looked at the strategic situation and immediately understood that the plan was obsolete. The German army in Normandy was broken. Their defenses were collapsing. Ports in Brittany didn't matter if the war could be won before they were needed. Patton sent 1 corps to Brittany to fulfill the letter of his orders. The rest of Third Army turned east, toward Paris, toward the German border. He would exploit the German collapse until he ran out of gas or got orders to stop. Bradley quietly approved. Eisenhower was informed after Patton was already moving. By the time anyone could countermand the orders, Third Army was already gone. Patton's divisions moved faster than any army had moved in modern warfare. 50 miles in days. Then 100. Then 200. They liberated French towns so quickly, German defenders were caught by surprise. French citizens woke up to find American tanks rolling through their streets. The Germans tried to retreat in order. Patton kept cutting them off. His armor moved faster than German infantry could march. By mid-August, Third Army had advanced further in 2 weeks than British forces had advanced in 2 months. In 14 days, Patton had gone from Normandy to the Seine River. He had done in 14 days what Montgomery had promised to do on D-Day, and still hadn't accomplished 6 weeks later. After the war, Allied intelligence interrogated surviving German generals who had fought in Normandy. Their testimony revealed the truth about Montgomery's claims. General Hans Eberbach commanded Panzer Group West at Caen. After his capture in August 1944, he told U.S. Army historians, "The Germans concentrated panzers at Caen because that's where the British were attacking. The German defense was dictated by British attacks, not by some British deception plan." General Fritz Bayerlein of the Panzer Lehr Division gave similar testimony after his capture in 1945. He said the British attacks at Caen were serious breakthrough attempts. Operation Goodwood particularly convinced the Germans that the British were trying to break out. The massive bombing and tank assault was clearly meant to shatter our defenses. None of us believed Montgomery was deliberately holding us in place. We believed he was trying desperately to break through, and failing. When asked about the American breakout at St. Lo, German generals admitted they had been surprised by its speed. The German testimony destroyed Montgomery's post-war narrative. He hadn't been conducting a brilliant deception operation. He had been trying to break through at Caen and failing repeatedly. The Germans had concentrated against him because he was attacking, not because they were being fooled. American success came despite Montgomery's failures, not because of them. The numbers tell the story that official histories tried to obscure. The U.S. First Army suffered over 62,000 casualties in Normandy. 20,000 killed in action, the rest wounded or missing. These were casualties incurred while fighting in the Bocage, while Montgomery was stuck at Caen. In some units, the attrition rate for riflemen was 90%. Companies were rebuilt multiple times, regiments decimated, divisions shattered. The 7th Corps alone suffered 11,000 casualties in July during the fighting leading up to Cobra. Every one of those casualties has a name. Everyone has a family that received a War Department telegram. Everyone paid the price for a promise made on a planning map in England, a promise that was broken before the sun set on June 6th. Montgomery promised to take Caen on D-Day. He failed for 6 weeks. Patton broke out of Normandy and advanced 250 miles in 3 weeks. One general was cautious, methodical, and failed. The other was aggressive, relentless, and won. The Normandy campaign succeeded despite Montgomery, not because of him. American soldiers broke through where British forces had stalled. American armor exploited where British forces had consolidated. American ingenuity, one sergeant with a welding torch, solved the problem that 6 weeks of British planning could not. And when the history books gave Montgomery credit for a strategy he had been forced into by his own failure, the men who had fought in those Norman fields knew the truth. Bradley knew. Patton knew. The German generals who faced them knew. And the families of 62,000 American casualties knew. They knew what that promise cost. Eisenhower was asked after the war what he thought of Montgomery. He chose his words carefully. He said Montgomery was a thoroughly competent commander. Coming from Eisenhower, that was about as close to a condemnation as diplomacy allowed. Because the man who had promised to take Caen on D-Day had instead trapped American soldiers in a 6-week nightmare of hedgerows and death. And George Patton, the General Montgomery called a reckless cowboy, did in 14 days what Montgomery couldn't do in 42. The Bocage claimed 40,000 American casualties. Every hedgerow was paid for in blood. But out of that blood came something Montgomery never anticipated. An American army so battle-hardened, so aggressive, so determined that when they finally broke into open country, nothing on earth could stop them. Not Panzer divisions, not the Siegfried Line, not the Rhine River, not even Bernard Montgomery's need to rewrite history. If you believe the men who fought in those hedgerows deserve the truth, hit that subscribe button. And if you want to see what Patton did when his fuel was cut off to give Montgomery priority, the story of how one decision may have cost the Allies 6 months of war, that video is next. Thanks for watching.